Tanzania, who is currently the Executive Director and Consultant of Daim Associates, but also Chairman of NDC, CTI, and ESCO. And then we have Professor Miguel, Chief Executive of the International Center for Sustainable Action. And then we have Nico Lepman, Technical Advisor, Climate Change and Environment, Trademark East Africa. And then we have Engineer Oliver Bayer, who is the immediate past Director General of the National Environmental Management Council. So I'll be very strict with time. We're going to go straight to questions after the introduction so that we can give floor to the audience so that they can contribute as we move along. Dr. Das, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. I am Rocio Diaz-Chavez. I am the Deputy Director and Energy and Climate Change Program Leader from the Stockholm Environment Institute Africa Center. So we are actually based in Nairobi, the same as my colleagues that are here and the presentation that you heard before. So I want to thank very much to the Swedish Embassy for the invitation, for being here. And sorry, could you please put the presentation? Yes, thank you. So this last topic is on environmental management in Tanzania's quest for industrialization. And we have already heard several of the topics that I am actually going to touch this afternoon in the morning. So I would like to go first on maybe some of the issues of shall we develop first or shall we clean after? So this takes us a little bit back to maybe the chicken and egg, but if we see in history what has happened with environmental disasters, so we can see the first one in the United States in the 30s and 40s, when unsustainable agricultural systems provoked the bone dust that left a large extent of area without possibilities of growing anything else there. We heard also about the Great Smog of London in the 1950s, and part of it even started in the late 1800s. The Bhopal disaster in India, Chernobyl in 1986, Exxon Valdez in 1989 in Alaska, BP in 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico, the spillage, and more recently, the dam that collapsed in Minas Gerais in Brazil in 2015. And these are just few examples of what has gone wrong with some of the industrial activities, even considering the agricultural sector. So if we think about this history, the ambassador from Sweden in the morning, she explained some of the international agreements that have been conducted along the last century. And I think we can go back to at least some of the main points here. The polluter pays principle. This was set up to make those organizations who polluted to pay, but it was only possible to do it if there was a piece of legislation or policy in place. The next one is on the precautionary principle. So the idea here was moving from paying after and rather looking at the possible risks before having the activity. And the last one is sustainable development, that we are all familiar with the definition from the Brundtland report. And I think that there are at least two issues that we have to take out from this definition that has evolved in the last 20 years. And one of them is that we have to consider stakeholders, and the other one is the issue of equity. So all these international environmental agreements have also been evolving, but they are considering several of the issues discussed in the morning and that we are going to discuss now. And one of the last agreements that we have seen here a couple of months ago is the free trade agreement in Africa. So you recognize that several regions in Africa already had free trade, but now the idea is really to have the whole sub-Saharan Africa linked to this type of trading. And if you see how much of the trading is really from manufactured exports or manufactured products, it's actually traded inside Africa and not necessarily out of Africa. So this is an important point. In the morning, we saw the presentation also on the GDP, but I want to bring your attention to this part here. Only 6% of the GDP in Tanzania is related to manufacture. While if we see at this last data, we can see that the sector of construction is growing, but at a very slow pace, while transport has already stagnant a little bit. But the one that has improved considerably is the mining sector, one of the sectors that has more environmental problems that we actually did not even discuss in the morning. So there are already several environmental management tools that have been in place because of all the previous disasters that we've seen for around 20 years, if no more. And all of them they share in common the use of indicators, but particularly if we take a look to business, environmental management systems, corporate social responsibility, and integrated assessments are probably the most advanced in these terms. And we have to consider how environmental management process can be enforced, but also monitored in the case of, in all countries, but specifically here in Tanzania. And we have to consider also that for many of these activities related to sustainable development, we need data. Data that can be used to enforce and monitor whatever kind of projects we are dealing with. And this is something where we are lacking on. If we consider this data, maybe we can move a little bit further with a leapfrogging what's discussed in the previous section, maybe circular economy. And some of you may be aware that Rwanda, Nigeria, and South Africa signed an agreement on circular economy. But in a recent meeting we had, we found that there is very little understanding of what circular economy is, except for the basics of reduce, reuse, and recycle. And if you consider that maybe this could be redefined in less industrialized countries, for example, all the second-hand clothes that are sold in sub-Saharan Africa that is coming from Europe, but that very rarely we can see a reduction, for example, in cotton production or in the manufacturing sector. The same happens with, for instance, vehicles and other IT equipment that is sent out to other countries to be assessed. So how can we link all these environmental management with issues with sustainable development goals and to promote a more industrialized Tanzania? So we have several indicators that are addressing these aspects from industry, from the natural resources we are using, and energy. So just to finalize, we can see that we need actually science for environmental management and policy. And this is coming, for instance, from Sustainable Development Goal number 9, where research is specifically mentioned there, and there is a target on the amount that should be put in terms of education and capacity building. And it is even mentioned the African countries. There was also one question in the morning regarding innovation. It's an aspect that we have to consider for the industrial advancement of the countries. And for this, we need a public and private partnership. So how can we link the policy with the decision-making process and also governance, considering stakeholders? So there was this question in the morning about how much is invested in research. So this is the GDP that Tanzania has been investing in research, which is less than 1%. And we were talking about equity. If we really see how many women are involved in research, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, it's almost nothing. So this is also an opportunity in terms of research and GDP to encourage gender equity as well. So some of the key issues to consider for the discussion of this panel are this precautionary principle and environmental management. The minister mentioned this morning, shall we develop first or clean and clean later? and how we can have innovative methods for disindustrialization and trading, the need for data for research and for enforcement and monitoring in terms of policy and governance, and investment in improved capacities and skills regarding this area of research. How can we engage the public and private sectors to really collaborate in order to advance industrialization in Tanzania? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Rasio, for introducing the topic. From her presentation, and we all know that it is true that in order to develop, one has to develop industry. It is also true that industrialization creates employment, but it's also true that the industry is a culprit of environmental degradation. Now, we have to balance between management, environmental management, industrial development, and that is the key question. If we can start with Professor Migiro, can you tell us on how do you see Tanzania balancing this, where we can have a low-carbon industrial development, but at the same time make sure that we don't deter development because of the environment?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Before dwelling on the particular subject matter, I would like to take a short while to look at the history of what has happened in the world vis-a-vis industrialization and pollution. The concern that was raised this morning by Honorable Minister of whether we should get debt first and then clean up later. If we look at what happened in the industrialized world, at the very beginning when they went into manufacturing and industrial production, they were producing industrial products and at the same time, of course, generating waste. What happened to the waste that was being generated by the industrials at that time? They didn't do anything about it. So basically, they just ignored the waste that was put in the environment. And of course, production kept on. They increased the production, and at the same time, of course, generating more waste and putting that waste into the environment. The difference between then and now, and probably to some subsequent stages, was that the assimilative capacity of the ecological system could absorb that kind of waste. So probably they didn't feel it. So that's why they went through the ignoring of the waste generation, and then they went to the dilution of the waste that was being generated. And consequently, when the waste was accumulating, of course, they went into the control mechanism. That's when we got all these end-of-pipe technologies where they had treatment facilities. But the point I want you to share with me is this. The waste that is being generated, if you think very clearly, you can see that it comes from the inputs which are fed into the process itself. So basically, if you are putting some raw materials, putting chemicals, you have energy and all that stuff, at the end of the day, you get products and waste. So what we call waste is actually the material that you put in, which is mishandled in the process. And that's why we are saying, let's think differently. Let's try to see this resource that you have fed into the process, and probably you have bought it at a high price, you have put in labor and all that kind of stuff, and you end up getting the waste. This is something that you shouldn't waste. So waste is not waste, actually. Waste should be looked upon as a resource. And if you look at if you think on those lines, you will come to realize that we can actually industrialize and move on by decoupling the economic growth from the resource depletion and environmental degradation. It is possible. So that waste which goes, in the environment, eventually, you can actually tap that. Now people are talking about industrial symbiosis, that the waste from one industry can actually become a raw material for the another industry. And that means you can move on, and then you'll be closing the loop, so to say. That means eventually and ideally, we should be able in a position to use the material that we fed in our process to begin with and actually use it most of the time. Now, if I come to our situation in Tanzania, we have been working with SMEs in this country for some years now. And the concept of resource efficiency and pollution prevention works. It's a matter of making the industrialist to realize that he or she can actually conserve that material and optimize the resource use and make profit. That is one. The second thing that they do is also make sure that they can actually avoid polluting the environment, so they become compliant to the regulatory requirements. And the third aspect which goes with it is the health and safety aspect. She just talked about some of the accidents which have happened, and I think to me one of the accidents which makes me very uncomfortable is the Bhopal accident, the uranium carbide process. So I think I should stop there, then I can continue as we go along. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you've raised a very nice scenario on why it was easy for the developed world to actually use the environment as a vehicle to transform the waste, because the assimilation capacity was still there. But now we are seeing countries like China, for example, they are developing at this moment when already the environment is saturated, where the assimilation capacity is actually almost at zero. Miko, do you think that Tanzania should develop along the Chinese pathway or adapt to the cleaner production way, as the Professor Migiro has put it?
Yes, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen. Definitely go for environmental greener growth right now. That we have learned the lessons from China, that how much more expensive it comes, and especially not only the environment, but how much people are suffering. When we talk about alternative, that do we, like Minister Makamba mentioned here, that what should we do? Actually, is there that kind of option that we can postpone it? That when we talk about industrialization, Tanzania on the path, and when we talk about global markets, what is the demand from the global markets? It's that they set the standards and they are following green growth. We know that they are very concerned, companies, investors, concerned that what is produced by their companies, it's sustainable environmentally and socially. It's not only the profit making. And I read investors for forestry sector 3 years ago in this hotel, and there were lots of maybe 200 participants representing also international financiers, and everybody was concerned about investing and if not getting the certified wood for their processes, how are the social issues with the local communities, how are they solved, how are they involved. It's about that kind of reputational risk that is involved on investment. And when we talk about Tanzania and East African situation, that what is needed here for growth rate is good, 7-8%. Still, like my organization, Trademark East Africa, we are still concerned that it's not adequate to provide enough employment to people, adequate for taking care of the environment and inequalities, that how to tackle with the inequalities, that benefits of the industrialization will spread more evenly along the different parts of the countries, and when we think about vulnerable people, for example.
Okay. We all agree that the private sector has a huge role to play in the industrialization. And I'm not very sure how much is the industry, private sector in Tanzania engaged. And this probably, Dr. Nyantai, you can assist us on this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. My name is Sam Nyantai, Chairman of the Confederation of Tanzania Industries. As a private sector, fortunately in the system now, there is a formal way of engagement with the public sector, with the government. There are several fora through which the private sector can formally consult and dialogue with the with the government, with the public sector. There are also ad hoc meetings on PPDs, public-private dialogues, and directly with the ministries and the ministers as and when this is needed. Now, as a chairman and as an association, obviously, some of the industries most of them are private, but we also have public ones. So when we talk about industrialists, we are talking about both private and public. Now, the existing industries, I'd call them like they are in two groups. There are those who are busy, they are investing now, but there are those whose sort of operations are ongoing, and they are regulated by the same, some policy regulations which ensure that the environment is taken care of. For those who are starting, yes, it is easy to put mitigation measures to ensure that they don't pollute and they ensure they produce effectively, and if there are any effluents, these are treated. There are those which, where the current laws maybe found them existing, and of course, you try and retrofit to ensure that mitigation, pollution, and climate change aspects are taken care of. Now, when we talk of, I think you mentioned the lady, our Chokozamada, they mentioned about the Sustainable Development Goal number 9, which has something to do with building a resilient infrastructure in order to have sustainable development. And this one, of course, covers also skills, appropriate skills and all. Now, in order for Tanzania to industrialize, of course, we need to have, this is quite a challenge, a shortage of skills which need to be developed. But at the same time, and unfortunately, there are times when the regulator of environment, the NEMC in this case, there was a time my members and Dr. Baya, when he was still in the council, it is active, of course he has not gone there completely, they thought he's a very bad man, a very bad person, a very bad institution. But I think this has more to do with understanding and appreciating the objectives for which the council was set up, and also appreciating that some of the activities that we are doing in terms of manufacturing, producing, are affecting others, they are affecting the environment, and that measures need to be put in place to ensure that there is sustainable environment and there is green production, clean production, and ensure that whatever measures need to be done, they are put there. Of course, the enforcement challenges are there in terms of, sometimes they may appear to be ad hoc. And one of the things that we appreciate, and this is where the interaction and the dialogue with the government for over, I must say, maybe the last 10 years, has somehow resulted into the production and the finalization of a blueprint which would regulate the regulators. You know, you need to regulate the regulators. The regulators, there's quite a few of them, and they were affecting business in various ways, including the ones on the environment. So we believe that once this is effectively implemented, a few or most of the issues that we have concerns about would be addressed. Of course, some of the laws may need to be reviewed, but in the meantime, I think it is regulating what happens, because sometimes some of the regulators, I'm not saying names necessarily, or some of the others kind of keep on kind of overlapping, causing repetition and inspections of things which would otherwise be. So I think in the morning, there are bits of politics. I don't know how we can factor out the politics about the environmental checks, environmental regulations, because as the minister, I think the minister in his minister's speech mentioned about whether somebody can say just produce because we need this product, so you must produce. And then if there are any bad effects in terms of waste, then we'll deal with those ones later. But I think it is important to design and to make sure that from the very beginning, whatever bad effects that this industry, this production, this activity is causing is addressed, and to minimize this. So the policy, legal and regulatory environment must be correct, but also those who are impacted by it, and the three groups, there is the regulator, whether it's the government, and then there is the industry itself, and some of the other people who are affected by the industry, by whatever products that come out, must also make sure that they are not affected adversely. That's all for the time.
Yeah, thank you very much. There are several things you've mentioned. I'm not very sure, is our industry now low carbon industry, or is it a normal industry? This will go to buy. And if it's a normal industry, what do we do from the regulatory point of view to actually move, as we are moving towards clean industry, low carbon footprint? If we are already there, and we all know what the Deputy Minister of Environment, Minister of Environment is doing when moves around shutting industries, which means they are not low carbon or something. Yeah.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll probably say right from the outset that we are not yet there. We are struggling. We are on the way, but we are not yet there. We are not yet a low carbon industry. Let me pick my contribution to this discussion from a regulatory point of view, as you have rightly put it. And let me start by saying, why do we regulate industries? The discussion has come up this morning about the industry being a culprit of environmental pollution. That's why we need to regulate industries. And we also regulate industries because the investors has a limit for self-compliance. They will need a watchdog behind at some point. Now, looking at very quickly, the situation in the country, the industrial sector in Tanzania, looking from the history perspective, it started with some of the industries converting the existing semi-qualified structure into some industrial facilities. And those you find there are many in the country. There are portion of industries that were constructed with the proper planning. But generally speaking, the industries in the country do not have improper waste treatment facilities. And that is the big challenge. As we are all aware, the regulatory regime in Tanzania has put in place a policy. We have a law, and the investments as of today, as we speak, EIA is mandatory for all investments. Now, what do we need as we move from now onwards? I was very happy when I was invited to this meeting, actually, because few months before I exited from the office, I was lucky to present a paper which I titled The Roadmap to Industrialization in Tanzania, an Environmental Consideration. And I presented this to one of the parliamentary committees. I've never had any discussion after that presentation. I'm glad that this presentation now, this meeting is bringing back this subject to discuss. Looking forward, how we move, we need to industrialize while achieving high level of industrialization without damaging the environment. That's what we need. We want to achieve industrialization without frustrating investments. But more importantly, we need a win-win situation where we realize both benefits, the economic benefits, as well as environmental benefits. It is important that we continue regulating this sector. And we need to industrialize in this country by putting in place a regulatory regime which has the following features. One, it has to ensure the use of scientific research to support industrialization and the capacity building. But also, we need industrialization process in this country, which will focus on the use of existing national resource base. But also, we need industrialization process which will propel energy saving and emission reduction technologies. Because this is the main challenge. Despite the fact that our policy and the laws are supported by environmental standards, but sometimes enforcement of the standards has been a very big challenge because we do not have solutions to prescribe for the investments to follow. And that's why there's a need to propel energy saving and emission reduction technologies. But we also need to embrace green industrial practices, which entails, one, practices that work towards achieving sustainable development and the realization of the win-win between economic and environmental benefits, which I've just said. We need an industrialization process which will drive the drivers, will ensure that the drivers of industrialization are put in place, which include policies that support technological change and innovation, drivers that policies that protect the existing natural resource and promote its abundance, because industrialization, some of the important or the imperatives is water supply, it is energy, it is infrastructure. Now we need the policies that will support the development of these drivers for the industries, but also policies that promote precautionary principles in the environmental management. I think in a way this has been really covered. But I also look into the industrialization process from the regulatory perspective to have a regime that will drive industrialization in Tanzania towards responding to the imperatives of industrialization, which some have mentioned, but also include the internationalizing our national economies. We need to produce environmentally friendly and competitive product. I remember there are cases in the world, there are countries which rushed quickly into industrializing the economy, but they forgot integrating the necessary environmental requirements in the products. When they were ready, to sell, they could not sell in the international market because the product did not integrate the necessary environmental conditions. As you may be aware today, some of the consumers will dictate, they will push for, they wanted to see qualities of some products having, for instance, they have the eco-labeling. If you do not meet those standards, despite the fact that they may rush into industrialization and the massive production, but you cannot sell. So it's important that we put in place policies that will support this kind of
I think that's enough for now. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've heard from the introduction, the panelists. It's now up to you to ask questions, but also I can ask you questions. Rosia, when presenting, she mentioned about the very nice principles we keep on talking, precautionary principle, polluter pays principle. Probably if somebody amongst you can explain on how they can be applicable to Tanzania. Because always there has been a problem that when you are talking of polluter pays principle, you pay for what? For the environmental services? For the lost opportunity? You pay for what? Maybe when you are contributing or asking questions, you can also brainstorm on that. Anybody who wants the floor? I can see a hand there.
Thank you for the nice presentation and the panelists. What I can add to the polluter pay principle, maybe I'll take back to, I have experience in manufacturing industry. I was working with Unilever, and by the time I was working with Unilever, they had this vision of doubling the size of their revenues, but while having or reducing the footprint on the environment. So by doing so, we had to have good technologies, driving people, giving the right educations. But now going to the polluter pays principle, we have this drive of extended producers' responsibility. We can take an example of plastic, whereby we drink Coke or any other product, and this plastic goes to the landfill. So Coca-Cola, as I know for now, they are now promoting, even encouraging people to collect this plastic, and they even pay they invest in terms of money so that people, they can be able to collect this plastic and take them for recycling. And it has to go the same way with other manufacturers in Tanzania, and so that they provide incentive. So the CSR, the corporate social responsibility, will now turn into a social responsibility on environment. So if we move in this direction, that's where we can say we have a polluter pay responsibility by encouraging people who are doing recycling, collecting these recyclables and changing them to things like items which are better to be used used in Tanzania. So that's how I see as a polluter pays a responsibility. Thank you.
Okay, this is a Q&A session. Huh? You don't forget that you are asking the panelists. I was just teasing out of course you've mentioned the polluter pays principle, basically looking at the management of the pollution, but not at the implication of the pollution itself. If, for example, when you are producing your plastic, you produce, for example, the noxious gases like carbon dioxide, and these will definitely go into the air, you form climate change and blah, blah, blah. And then when you are paying for only looking at handling the waste, you are not actually addressing the pollution that was sent out when you are producing the product. So that's still a dilemma. If anybody else who wants to to ask a question. Yes, Madam there.
Hi, again, my name is Karen Dossi from the Kilimanjaro Project, and my question goes to anybody on the panel, but specifically the professor who presented, Professor Chavez, if I got it right. So you did mention something about data and how we can use the data revolution to address the challenge, the climate change challenge. But my concern, or rather what I would like to hear from you, is with the current status of the data revolution in Tanzania, or rather sub-Saharan Africa, and the lack of administrative data that even we're lacking at ministerial level and at LGA level, how do we address that, and how do we come up with sustainable approaches if we cannot even, if we don't even have the data to do so? So where do we start, or rather, how do we proceed from here?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to address both recycling and lack of administrative data. That I'd like to call for voluntary actions. Corporate responsibilities was introduced here. That why does it have to be always regulations and regulations and regulations? That I recall when I was working here in Tanzania, talking with one company representative who told that they need to renew their certificates and permits, 24 of them every year. Regulations, regulations. And when we talk about like big global companies, that without regulations they are aiming at zero carbon companies on voluntary basis. They have their corporate responsibilities on green companies, so that they apply recycling rules tighter than what is required in the regulations. So maybe like Tanzania should go more on that way, that regulations are needed, but finding that kind of solutions that help to make the bureaucratic processes lighter, still being strict with pollution, but giving space more for incentives, that companies are encouraged to invest on green economy, solar power. We heard today these great news that was it 80% of the new investment on energy is renewable energy. That kind of solutions that on voluntary basis companies go for them, and then they internally monitor them. You don't need that kind of regulatory monitoring bodies, and as we know in Tanzania, government is not that efficient in monitoring all the regulations.
Of course, the self-regulation is good, but you really need a cultural change and change of mindset. That because if you still have those people who think they can actually avoid investing on cleaner whatever, they will just do it. So maybe, Rasio, you can address the issue of data.
Thank you. Yes, I think that the problem of data is always that it's either lacking, really you don't have data, or the data is scarce. It is distributed in different organizations. So the problem is who could be the depository of data? And it can be several organizations. It can be partly in the government, and it can be partly also in research institutes. There are many research institutes that are not necessarily academia, so it can be a combination of that. But certainly I would say that, for instance, the international organizations that have activities in many sub-Saharan countries, they are also depository of data. And of course, you have the reports and access to some of it, for UN, FAO. But I think there should be really a bigger effort, talking about big data, and where we really can have access to that, and that it should be really publicly available. Most of it should be really publicly available. So I think it is really a matter of how the governments and the research organizations really try to get into this partnership. And sorry, Mr. Chairman, but if I can just add to this issue of the voluntary standards, I think that is also it's very important. In some areas, it is kind of a leapfrogging as well. Yeah.
So can we please stand? The Honorable Vice President is walking in. Can you please stand? Then you can continue.
Sorry. So just to finalize, I think it is important, but there needs to be also a culture into becoming part of these environmental management tools. And I think one of the ways is really to start with the simple one, environmental management within the industrial sector.
Okay. Any other question? Yes.
Yeah, okay, I would like to know to what
Can you mention your name and where you're coming from?
My name is Abdallah. To what extent the concept of cleaner production has been... Oh, I'm from an organization called Tanzania Alliance for Biodiversity. Yeah, I would like to know to what extent the concept of cleaner production has been integrated in industrial promotion, because we are told that, okay, if you apply cleaner production, then at the end of the day, we are going to have clean environment and at the same time promoting economy. And my second question is, now we see a number of industries that are being established in a number of places. Is it not possible to create, for example, industrial zone whereby a number of industries will be located in one place, so that when it comes to managing the waste that will be generated, can be easier rather than having industries scattered almost all over?
Professor Ngiru, I think that falls in your docket.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Let me say that the cleaner production concept is embedded in our policies, both the Sustainable Industrial Development Policy, and it is also embedded in the Environmental Management Act and the Environmental Policy. So as far as policies are concerned, we are okay. The question is, how do we mainstream this concept in the activities of the enterprises on a day-to-day basis? The approach that we have so far is that the adoption of a cleaner production concept is a voluntary thing. And like I said before, all the companies that we have worked with have testified to getting higher productivity, at the same time reducing and also taking care of the issue of health and safety. So there is no doubt as to the relevance of the concept within the activities of the enterprises. The question is, how do we upscale the use of the concept in as many enterprises as possible? But like I said, this is something that is done on a voluntary basis, but we know countries like China, for instance, they have made it mandatory. So it's a question of government deciding on how to move, because at the end of the day, I think the enterprises really need to appreciate and make use of the resources in an efficient manner. And I think if we do that, we will be safe as far as the resources that we use today will also, and I think as one day the minister said, this is a borrowed resource, so it's not ours. We needed to take it back to the people that we borrowed it from. So we have to make sure that we use it sustainably, and I think this is the issue.
Okay. There is this issue that is raised on concentrating industry in one area or scattering. Who wants to take that? Maybe let's start with Baya, then you come in.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The concentration or concentrating industries in one zone is one of the contemporary industrial management aspects. It's whereby industries of the similar processes are put together in what is commonly known as industrial parks. So the advantage of putting industries of the similar processes together is, one, industries can live in symbiosis, whereby the waste from one industry becomes an input to the next industry. Secondly, the class of industries can share a waste treatment processes together. But also, it becomes easier for the government to put in the infrastructural services to those industrial parks. These practices are in Ethiopia, but also countries like South Korea. And recently, I was told Rwanda has done some of the industrial parks. So this is common, and I think, and I recommend, is one way for us also to go. Thank you.
So you can answer it also, but also you can also talk on the cocktail effect if you want.
Yes, thank you. Professor Baya explained the benefits of environmental management of that kind of industrial parks. And as we have read about studies about future that tens of millions of working places would be moving out from Asia because the labor costs are getting too high in Asia. And we in Trademark, we are planning to pick up many of those places to Eastern Africa. And referring to Ethiopia, that there are good examples there on that kind of industrial parks. They employ tens of thousands of people nowadays, and that is the role of the government to facilitate that kind of park, managing the infrastructure, making it in a coordinated way, well-planned way. The big question is that we have the threat of technology and robotics, automatization, that of those tens of million working places moving back somewhere or to Europe, back to close to the markets. Robotics may change the situation that, well, it's competing with labor costs.
Okay, Dr. Nyantaya.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think Professor Migiro mentioned about the green production and that it is voluntary compliance, voluntary implementation of it. I believe that if manufacturers and industries can be shown that by adopting cleaner production methods, first of all, the cost of treating whatever waste that is coming out will be, you will not have that cost, hopefully. So there are certain production methods, production in certain products where if you adopt a green production method, then you don't have to have a lot of waste to treat with, and therefore that cost may be minimized. I believe so. So that should be the incentive. You see, the problem with the voluntary is that if they think it's a cost, then most people may want to avoid it. Now, the second point relates to industrial parks and industrial zoning. I think this is something that needs to be taken very seriously with the LGAs now, with the quest for industrialization and the push that LGAs or districts or other regions must have about 100 industries and things like that. So that rather than try and compete and rush to have industries in a chaotic manner, I think, as Dr. Baya mentioned, if in allocating these industrial areas, they ensure that industries of a certain nature that will not cross-pollute each other, located something. I think we messed up ourselves in Dar es Salaam, where Mikocheni, and I think part of even the Sinza, was declared as a residential light industrial. Now, the light industrial bit, unfortunately, there was no clear definition, so where light ends, and as a result, you had heavy industries, which we are now facing. Some of us who are staying in Mikocheni, we have this problem of this. So it would be really ideal for the zoning to identify where industries have to be located, and residential areas should really remain residential areas without trying to mix these things. And I think that also is part of the problem that we thought was a bit of political. I mean, I don't think I want to have one industry next to my sitting room necessarily. So let me go to an industry and do a product. Otherwise, I sit at home and play with my grandchildren. Sansa.
Okay, another question. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, moderator. My name is Mtambo. I'm the Director General of Tanzania Industrial Research and Development Organization. I would like to underscore the emphasis by the panelists that research-based information is important in industrialization. And what we talk here is about high-impact research. We really need to move away from the usual type of research that we conduct in our institutions. We need to go to high-impact research, like those who address technology information, forecasting. We have to forecast what sort of technology that will be coming in a bigger way, and what kind of effect to the environment these technologies will have. Also, the technology that we have at the moment, in 5 or 10 or 20 years, how are they going to be? So these are the things that we need to look at. And I think that we've started a unit at Itildo that is going to work on that. We've been mentioning about clusters. Industrial clusters is very important. But what we need is to have a kind of industrial mapping in a holistic approach. Because currently what we see is that investors come and they sometimes even decide to put an industry wherever they feel that is interesting to them. So we need to have an industrial mapping for the whole country, and that should be done at a multidisciplinary manner. Actually, it's multi-sectoral manner. It will involve a number of ministries there. So at Tildo, we are going to start on that. But also, we talk of alternative energies. We talk of coal. But we have not done much mapping on coal. That is another area that we need to do mapping. And we know that the coal that we want to also to use for metallurgical activities, we have the Liganga. But the metallurgical activities require metallurgical coal. We don't know where this coal is existing, so that also requires some mapping. So that is my contribution, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you've raised a very nice topic when it comes to capacities. Yes, we are talking of industrialization. What kind of training, what kind of capacities we need to build in research and training so that we meet the requirements of the industrialization. But at the same time, you've mentioned that high level research. Who decides this is high level? Yeah, if we don't have a system of deciding the national agenda on doing research in a particular area, how, for example, I don't know whether Tildo just unilaterally decided that this is high level, or do we have a high level as a nation? Professor Migiro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. The point I want to underscore, I think the point brought up by the participant is very pertinent. The role of R&D in industrialization and the innovation part of it is very crucial. And looking at how we are moving, sometimes I wonder whether we have a strategy of industrializing. In the middle 80s, we had the Tildos, the Temdos, the Kamatech. At the University of Salaam, we had the IPI, and I remember at that time we used to have regular meetings, I think every month, to review our programs and try to plan for the next future. If we don't invest in R&D, we won't move much, and innovation. We won't move much because I always remember what my professor told me many, many years ago. He said, if the human race needs to survive, we have to mimic nature. Nature has a way of doing things. And if our scientists can try to mimic what nature does, then I think we'll go far with our ecological system trying to support us. So I wanted, Mr. Moderator, to underscore the role of R&D and innovation in industrialization. It's very, very, very important. This morning I think there was also something about research at the university and things like that. But I've always wondered, like you are saying, who sets the program for research? Because as a country, as a nation, we need to have a research strategy. And we have all the human resource which we can deploy to actually make us achieve what we want. Universities should be given tasks to do. I recall at some point, I think through COSTECH, we had some discussion with the university, how do we commercialize R&D findings? And in particular, we are looking at industry. How can R&D serve the industry? Now, the question was, if researchers carry out research in their own way without involving the private sector or the industrialists, and then at the end of the day, you want to find a way of commercializing your findings or results, these guys will tell you this is not relevant to us. So why don't we really make the parties talk to each other? But the most important thing is that the government has got to set path to make sure that we have a research strategy in this country, and at the same time, all the players need to be given the tasks to be able to actually to deliver. Thank you.
Yes, we need research strategy. Who is going to set it? Can I have one last question so that I give the panelists opportunity to wrap up? Okay. Any question? Yes?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aquilin. I'm working with the MVIWATA, the National Farmers Network for Tanzania. My question goes to the panelists. I picked something from the presentation from Dr. Baya. Is something concerning the critical challenge in enforcement of the rules and regulation for achieving sustainable development. I've been just hearing since morning that we are having this critical problem in enforcement of the rules and regulations, and now it came up in this panel, and my question is, how best we are going to make sure that the grassroots level, they are not going to leave behind. As we can see, we have been experiencing this enforcement of the different regulation at LGAs. So can anyone just help us to see how best can we involve the grassroots level in this sustainable development? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe that will be the question all panelists will handle as we are wrapping up. How do we involve the grassroots? I'll start from you. We go that way.
Yes, that's the key. It's key in every organization, that how we involve everybody who is working in our organizations and the communities. And that's about real mainstreaming. of climate change and environmental issues, that it's not specific tasks for some specific experts. And it's mobilizing the plans. I remember that when I was here in Tanzania a couple of years ago, several years, there was so much strategic planning, policy development, but weak point is that how to implement the plans. There were speakers here who were telling the same, that we have to mobilize it in our organizations and go there inside the plans, whatsoever, indicators and budgets, and integrate these themes there.
One beauty aspect about the law, the environmental law in Tanzania, the institutional framework, it involves all levels up to grassroots. So one way of ensuring that grassroots are involved is through making them participate in the processes that are already stipulated in the law. And this is happening quite a lot, that grassroots are involved. But there are other mechanisms too that can be used to involve grassroots in understanding, but also in being part of the law implementation in this country. And this goes through programs that are implemented by the Vice President's Office and the NEMC.
Yeah, maybe taking up the R&D and the innovation bit, and I think we need to link this with our own education curriculum, because I think later on, we really want to make sure that the curriculum addresses, education curriculum as it is, addresses this. And more so, bringing in most of these tertiary institutions, the technical colleges and all that, which unfortunately, somewhere, we lost them on the way because most of those ones which existed graduated into universities. And as a result, I think there is some sort of gap. So we needed to have this. But maybe secondly, even from what we are discussing now, after the output from this workshop, I think the former director of the environment in the Vice President's Office, Mr. Mgurusi, mentioned that we still have that problem of silo. Each of the ministries, each of the sections, each of these working on their own. So we need some sort of coordination of this, because if you are to industrialize, even industrialization itself is an agenda. Even if the Ministry of Industries may be pushing it, I think we need to coordinate and ensure that there is integration, because industry cannot go on its own, it needs all the other supporting sectors for it to move. Thank you.
Okay, Professor Ngiro.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just wanted to possibly to end up with two points. One of the points is that we tend sometimes to underprice our resources. And if we do that, it becomes a disincentive for those who are using the resources. Now, we are trying to promote the approach whereby we want to do more with less. So we should price our resources properly. And I'm saying this from the experience that we had working with some enterprises in Tanzania. We went into one of the factories, and we are looking at, it was a beverage industry, and we are looking at, for beverage industry, they use a lot of water. So we were looking at the loss of water in their process. And when we walked through the plant, we realized that they were losing a lot of water. So we are saying this is very expensive for the plant. So we went to the management to impress on them that we have discovered something. And we had actually quantified the amount of water that they are losing in a certain time. And of course, you could multiply that in terms of the whole day, and then for a week and month, and so on and so forth. And then we asked them, what's the price for water? What are you paying? They say, water is free. So regardless of the quantity that we discovered that we are losing, times zero becomes zero. So no incentive. That is one. But the other thing, I think the point of data, she reacted to the issue of lack of data at the national level, macro level. But I'm also looking at it from the enterprise level, We have been moving around enterprises, and of course, most of the enterprises are private. So the custodian of the information is the owner. And that makes the workers not to become, innovative and trying to see how they could improve their processes. But in most cases, you find out that there is, lack of data. And you cannot manage what you can't measure. This is very clear. And that makes them, puts them in a position not to be able to anticipate the kind of losses that they are going through and how to go about it. So I think we really needed to work on the data, even at the micro level.
Okay. Thank you very much. One last word from me. This is a take-home message. That China, it was estimated that between 2013 and 2017, they were going to use 179 billion to clean air after they polluted it. With that, can we show appreciation to our panelists for the nice presentation? Thank you very much.
And can you give a hand to the moderator also, please? He did a good job. And we tried. Thank you very much. So as they step down, we go to the last session, and it's known as the high-level plenary session. And this session is going to summarize the discussions that were held by the three other themes or panels, not summarize actually, but at least crystallize those ideas in the hope that they can come up with further development and further ideas that can be exposed for the future. So can I please call the moderator first, Professor Mwandosia, to come up? Thank you. And then, I kindly welcome Honorable Minister Makamba, Minister of State, Vice President's Office. Honorable Minister Dr. Charles Tizeba, Minister for Agriculture. Honorable Ambassador Lars Ronus, Climate Ambassador for Sweden. Honorable Katarina Ragnit, Swedish Ambassador to Tanzania. You've changed your mind. So then we need a lady here. So then we'll call Ambassador Buriani to come up, please. I tend to be gender sensitive, So, and I hand over to the moderator. We have roughly about half an hour of discussions and about 20 minutes of Q&A from the audience. So, over to you, Professor Mwandosia.
Yeah. Thank you very much, our facilitator, able facilitator. Your Excellency, the Vice President of the United Republic of Tanzania, you can't get an honor greater than this to moderate such a very high-powered panel. But it's an honor which I take with a lot of humility. Well, in front of us is a cream of Tanzania in terms of ability, in terms of foresight, in terms of capacity. So we are really blessed to have Honorable January Makamba, Minister of State in your office, Honorable Vice President. I don't think he sits on the same chair that I used to, because I think the lifts going to the floor where I used to go, it never used to work, so I think he's moved to another place. Yeah. And we have Engineer Tizeba, our Minister for Agriculture. I always say I don't envy you, because you know, every Tanzanian has to eat. And the time, or the moment Tanzania goes hungry, you are the one to be hanged. Whether it be because of climate change, that will not be a cause for, yeah, or a reason for not doing your job. But I think, thank you for being here. And Ambassador Burian, great service to this country, and in the diplomatic corps as well, in the diplomatic service, but we still remember your work as your contribution as Minister of State, also in the office of the Vice President. Ambassador Lars, we were together here just a moment ago, and we look forward to your perspectives, which we didn't hear because you left some things to be told at this very high-level panel. So with those words of introduction to our, really, this is the high-level panel, I would like just to say we'll have an easygoing interaction. You have been in this room since morning. You heard the speech of the Vice President, which really has guided us throughout the discussions. And who am I to start repeating all the good things that the Vice President has given us in terms of direction, in terms of vision, in terms of perception. So I think I'll start with Lars and say, what has been your perception since morning of the climate change, environment, and the national economy? Particularly, you have a bird's eye view of Tanzania, coming, as it were, from afar, but from a very friendly country, a friend of Tanzania. So maybe if you set the ball rolling, I think we'll later on have the panelists join in. So I'll give you that honor of being the first. Lars?
Thank you so much, and that's a privilege to kick this discussion off. I must say that I've come here, I've been very impressed, both by the turnout, but also by the kind of discussion we have had, and the presence, the high-level presence here shows the political interest, the political commitment to address these kind of issues. No? So that's, I find, extremely encouraging to have the Vice President here and the ministers taking part of this discussion. I would also say that you can go anywhere in the world and to a capital, and you'll find this discussion taking place. Because climate change is a concern worldwide. It's a threat, but increasingly it's being discussed in terms of how does the pathway look like as we design the new kind of development model that will bring better lives, not only for ourselves, but which can be sustained over time. So that's the big challenge. And it's a terrain which is, we are all into. We're all trying to find the way here. There is no model to replicate. And I'm convinced, just looking in terms of growth, population, it's the new economies, the emerging economies, that's where you will find these solutions. That's where you will have to find the technology adapted to this. So that's why it's interesting to be here. Very encouraging to be here, I think, to see. And very briefly, I think government has, and this is, I'm just reflecting on our own discussion in Sweden, I think government has a huge responsibility in setting the direction, because that provides predictability. That tells this is where we are going, and so people know the rules and know where to go. But also to project that vision of hope that we can build better society. I think there is a challenge for governments also to see how can you produce that conducive environment, a collaborative environment between government, business, and civil society, because we all have to contribute to this. And then there is an issue of how to bring climate into the mainstream of public administration. How to make the climate dimension part of public administration throughout. The modalities for collaboration, the incentive structures, and the like. And finally, financing. International financing, that's part of international responsibility, and we are doing our part. But also looking at fiscal policies. How can you make use of fiscal policies so you tilt from the brown to the green, so to speak, and you pave the way for that path? Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I may follow on what you have just said, particularly in relation to the discussions this morning, can you give us the experience of Sweden in relation to the way it sort of frog-leaped the industrial, the coal economy into, right where it is now with the involvement or the percentage of solar or renewable energy in the economy of Sweden, and the future, as you told me about the biomass future of Sweden.
Well, very briefly, on the part of the government and the parliament, by broad partisan agreement, there is now a climate law framework setting out that in 2045, by the latest, we will have a carbon neutral economy. We will have net zero emissions in Sweden. So that provides the predictability path now. Now, what you're seeing is that from the business side, and our business is mining, steel, it's heavy industry, forestry, they are coming up with their own roadmaps. So we have 9 branch associations representing these heavy industries, saying we will go climate compatible. And they are saying we will do it because that will bring us the competitive edge. That will make us sure that we are well positioned when this transition comes. This is how we will be competitive in the future. So last week I was at the Scania, you know Scania, the big truck company. I think it has a present here. It's the world leading truck company. They brought all their management, their suppliers, their clients, and they brought in Al Gore, the vice president, talking about climate change. That's the message they want to give their people. Now, we have to become sustainable over time. And as you mentioned, biofuel, that's for us, Sweden as a forestry country, have a sustainable forestry. That's where we see our economy. And I could go into that. It's biofuel, biomass. Clothing will be by biomass in the future. We are having fashion shows made of forest material.
Well, you seem to be going back to where we were many years back. We used bags for clothing, but that's interesting. May I also take this opportunity to invite my colleague and my sister, Batilda. She has been here since morning, so I really need not even give you the thrust of what went on. I have a list of things that different panels discussed, but I know you were one of the, you sat on this chair, so you can easily just join in the discussion. But one aspect that seems to have been missing is the gender content in climate adaptation. And maybe it's not fair to ask you to, but if you wish, you may wish to join in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, from the discussion this morning, I think what we can wrap up this evening is the importance of really depart from questioning whether we should develop and set aside environmental issues and then catch up later. Because at the moment we are talking when it's almost 26 years since we had this Earth Summit in Rio in 1992, then in South Africa in 2002. With throughout those years, 26 years, we are talking of sustainable development. So we have to see that we develop both economically, socially, and environmentally. So from the discussion, of course, there were some teasers, but all in all, everyone believed that we need to develop on a sustainable way. We know that through green and blue economy, we can alleviate poverty. We can bring our people out of poverty without no problem. But also the cost of foregoing, particularly not taking action on issues of climate, is much more expensive. This year alone, we've seen how much infrastructure has been affected. In Arusha, most places, like in Manyara, some of the parks were even closed for 2-3 days because it was completely unpassable because of the infrastructure effect of rain and floods. But even here in Dar, we saw how it has been affected. So I think what we need, and you were saying that we need to really bring the sectors together. In Tanzania, we're lucky because the environmental portfolio is under the Vice President office, and she chairs the committee where most of the climate sensitive sectors are part of that committee. So literally there's not that, the connection, the linkage is there at the highest level. And we know we have also at the district level committees in charge of environment. So where is the gap and why we see not to really interact? That is where we think we should thread a little bit and see how we can work along together. But there were also issues of compensation of ecosystem and services coming from the environment to so that we can take the benefit to the local community, and it becomes like involving them to see that they have to be the guards and to watch the environment because it benefits them as well. We had cases of reduction of emission from forest degradation where people plant tree and so forth. But what I think we need to do more in addressing the issue of charcoal, particularly now we are talking that charcoal is costly, we should go do other alternative sources like gas and stuff like that, is to see how we can attract districts to plant fast-growing trees. The Ministry for Natural Resources and Tourism, the Forestry Department, used to have fast-growing trees in several districts. I know Kongowe was one of the pilot projects under FINIDA, but then this did not integrate it into our district activities, so that each district will have fast-growing trees, particularly for forest, and also encourage other briquettes and other type of fuel instead of using charcoal. Because I don't see, and it will be very difficult to go away completely of using charcoal. What we can do is reducing. In most families now in the urban area, you'll find they're using gas, but then they will have a charcoal. If they were using 3 bags of charcoal in a month, now they will maybe use 1 bag. So we really need to talk to see how we can reduce the use of charcoal. We talk a little bit, we didn't talk much on plastic bags, but this is a challenge, and particularly now, this theme of this International Environment Day is beat the plastic bag. I think we need to see how we can deal with that, because I know the Vice President comes from Zanzibar. Zanzibar, they've been able to really go away with plastic bags. The Rwanda team came to Zanzibar, they studied, and then they went and implement, and they are doing fine. And at one moment, I think, Professor, before you just moved from environment, you started really rolling out and see how we can ban it. Then when I was the Minister of State in charge of environment, we also we work on trying to ban it, but then we had a lot of resistance from the industries, particularly the dairy industry. Please wait, we are going to give us time. But I don't know if Mheshimiwa Waziri still, they are saying of giving more time. But I think we should really see how we can get away with plastic bags. And another thing, maybe, Professor, I wanted to reiterate, which was not discussed this morning, is the waste that we are incurring, particularly water, stormwater. We don't capture or we don't harvest rainwater. This year it rained a lot in most areas, and we have lost a lot of water, liters and many liters of water, which we could have captured, and then it could have been of use, because this water, which really flows, those are the ones who also distract our environment and roads. We discuss also on the importance of research and development. We need to give some, because as we are industrialized, we need research, innovation, scientific research. We have to put some more money in the R&D so that we can get informed scientific research and data to help in making decisions. And lastly, maybe talking on the climate change and the role of women. You see, most people, when you talk of climate change, they feel it's not real. But now, because the impact is felt by everyone, they appreciate. Professor, I was lucky to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in 2014. When I got to the Uhuru Peak, and I saw the piles of snow, ice, and the way it has been deteriorating, it's, you will feel like, okay, maybe it's not going to disappear completely, but it will definitely have an impact maybe in 2015 or in some years to come. And in most of the communities in the coastal areas, where they cannot now access clean water because of the sea salt water which has encroached in most of the wells in those areas. And this affects women. Women have to move to go to far away to fetch water because they cannot now access to these water in the nearby communities because of intrusion of the sea salt water in their wells. So I think maybe I'll stop it there and we can add a little bit more, but basically, when we discuss of the presenter talked about the common market in Africa, should we have a common resources? And I said, we do have common resources, like the Great Migration. We share that migration from Kenya to Tanzania. And we share also the management of those resources, like River Mara, on that side, we have a common project from Tanzania side and Kenya side so that we see the catchment of that river which flows and support the migration is not affected. So we do have some common resources within the neighboring countries that we take into account while we are addressing issues of climate change. Thank you very much, Professor.
Well, thanks a lot. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. Now I come to my young brother Charles, or to be correct, Honorable Charles Tazama. Oh, Honorable Engineer, Engineer Honorable Charles Tazama. Okay. Yeah, you joined us a little bit later than we had expected, but the discussion earlier on centered around agriculture, the vulnerability of the agricultural sector to climate change and its impact. And when it was discussed that we still, and for some time, our GDP will depend on the sector that you have oversight on. It means that really this is an area of concern, or it's your attention, or indeed everybody in the sector, including us all. So perhaps we would like to hear your perspectives on how you've braced yourself. Actually, we don't need to go far into the future, whether carbon dioxide concentration will double, because we are seeing the effect now. I mean, this year has caused havoc, and even as late as yesterday, you've seen the news about what's happening in the crops being destroyed in Kilimanjaro. And this is June. It's rather unusual. And so what do we do? How do we adapt to that? And how do we prepare ourselves to answer the question, the observation of Ambassador Matilda, that here we are, we have plenty of water coming in. And then next year there will be drought. I mean, it doesn't, shouldn't we be thinking of how to tap that at this stage, or that? I mean, I know you'll ask me, what did you do when you were in the water department, in the water ministry? But we have passed, we are now, it's now in the future, so forget about the past. Yeah, but when you look at Zimbabwe and you see all those small dams all over the country and South Africa, you imagine what we could have done with all the water that is flowing into the sea and causing havoc along the way. and particularly to our crops and to our infrastructure. But anyway, you may wish to say something about this. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Well, my apologies first that I could not attend the morning sessions. I had another engagement. But at least I followed what was discussed through the brochures scattered around. For us in agriculture, climate is everything. Climate is everything. The slightest change means a lot to the sector, means a lot. There are many ideas of how to go about these changes. The most recent is climate smart agriculture. That is, our farmers and other stakeholders, we are trying to give them the minimum understanding of how they should prepare themselves to any changes which may occur. But these changes, I've been listening to the panelists, the immediate past panelists here. It appears everybody is taking this as a challenge, something leading us to losses and what. But I mean, I'm trying to think out of that box a little bit. And for those who are only thinking that direction, I'm asking them to bear with me a little bit. You see, climate change may cause positive and negative impacts, depending on how prepared you are. You see, in every challenge, I think there is an opportunity. One has to be prepared, to be prepared, that if it comes this way, this is how I'm going to behave. If it comes this way, this is how I'm going to behave. And try to make the most out of any situation. Because if there are processes which we can stop, but there are processes which we cannot stop. Then for us, it is a matter of knowing that, well, if there will be more rains, this is how we are going to farm. If there is no rain, this is how we are going to farm. Or if there will be a lot of sunshine, this is how we are going to treat our crops. If there won't be any sunshine, this is how we are going to treat our crops. So it all depends how prepared one is to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change. I was listening to Professor Migiro's contribution a few moments ago. And then I asked my colleague, Janwali, how much has the temperature raised in recent years? He told me 2 centigrades.
We're trying to prevent it to get to 2 centigrades.
2 centigrades, okay, somewhere around there.
It will be 2 centigrade if we go.
If we go on with what we are doing.
Maybe in the next, towards the end of the century.
Okay. And then I try to change these 2 centigrades temperature increase into the amount of energy, how much energy is that globally. If you calculate this one, you find it's millions of megajoules. Now, is the environment, is our present environment ready to receive this increment of energy within the system? No. But what do we do? Reverse?
Adapt.
Adapt. So if the issue is adapting, then we have to try and be prepared both ways. Because floods, my sister is saying that we are not collecting this water. Yes, we are not collecting this water, and that is bad. This government, we have a program now to be launched the day after tomorrow by the president. And in this program, our first concern, that is, this program got 4 pillars, and the first concern, or rather an area of concern in this program, is sustainable use of water resources. And in that aspect, we are looking at ways and measures to be taken to make sure that water resources will be sustainably used, and we will not allow for losses which can be prevented. Water harvesting, irrigation systems, and the like will be taken into account, but all in all, to make sure that our water use is in a sustainable manner without affecting the environment drastically, making sure that at least what is, you see, the agroecologists, we don't have to go messing around with this particular resource water. And then whether or not our farmers are prepared, yes, ignorance is still there in most of our people. We still have a task of bringing them to a minimum understanding of how to address climate issues. We have a program ongoing to try and sensitize our people that, look, climate is changing, so should their farming practices also change. Because if we just leave them as they are, some of the issues are not that easy to know or rather comprehend. So we have a program in the ministry, and we are trying to bring in other ministries also to impact to the population that climate is changing, it's a fact, and so should our farming, eating, and all these other practices also change. Last year I went to, this is last year, yes, no, the year before last, 2016. There was drought in Kagera. I went to Karagwe, visited a family, and then I found this lady, she was there complaining that there was no food because of drought. Okay, looking around, yes, you could see coffee trees were drying, so, and banana trees also were drying up. So you could really sense that there was a problem in the area. But then as we were talking, and actually I was moved that yes, here we have a serious problem. But then when I turned around, I saw there was a lot of maize hanging somewhere there. And this lady, she was complaining that there is no food at all. Then I turned around and said, whose maize are those? She said, they're ours, but look, my kids cannot eat ugali. I said, you are joking. Your kids cannot eat ugali.
Rice, of
They
course.
want matoke.
Matoke, oh.
Yes. That is, food to them is matoke. Ugali and rice and what is not food for them. But then that is also just the culture which can be changed, because climate is changing, so should our farming, eating behaviors also change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Tizeba. I just wanted to ask, or rather may I start with some information on some work that I did before I joined the politics. I got a book published on the assessment of vulnerability and adaptation to climate change in Tanzania. That is in 1998. I had eight chapters, co-authored by myself and my colleagues. It was first chapter was climate change scenarios. Second was vulnerability of hydrologic resources, water, impact of sea level rise to the coastline, potential impacts to climate change on grasslands and livestock. That's an area of your interest. Now, chapter 5, impacts of coffee production, impacts on cotton production, impacts on maize production. Now, that was about climate change vulnerability and its impacts to Tanzania. The question which arises is, do you have a climate division in your ministry?
Yes, we do. We have actually, it's not a division as such, but at least a section which deals with the climate issues. And we have published booklets explaining to our farmers climate smart agriculture, that is ways and techniques to deal with the increased rainfall or decreased rainfalls. We are advocating also of modern techniques of farming when it comes to below average rains or over average rains. These are the things being disseminated to the public. And the effects can be always mitigated if you have the right understanding and technologies. So we have also this one falls under the division of mechanization to try and find the modern technologies which will help farmers cope with these changes. So yes, as I said, we have a complete set of instructions and information that will be required by the farmers to deal with the climate changes.
Okay, I think there'll be more questions from the floor, so I better not continue. But I was on a lighter side. I was a bit amazed that you said there is something that this government is going to, the president will...
to launch.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, to launch a program.
So this government is going to launch a program. It will be launched by the president, because the byline usually that I hear from you people is the fifth phase government led by His Excellency President John Joseph Pombe Magufuli. And then blah, 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 blah.
We do that in the parliament.
Everybody says. And then you forget that the President John Joseph Pombe Magufuli and the Vice President. You're not, you people are not gender sensitive. Thank you. Anyhow, now let's go to our host of today, the one who has worked very hard to get us together here, and the one who is steering the environment portfolio under the Vice President. He has been here throughout, so he has had, I think, some notes were prepared in terms of summary of what has been going on in all the three panels, but it's not of any use to you because you have been sitting here throughout. So I'm sure you have you prepared yourself to say what you wanted to say, which you were prevented to say by sitting on the sideline. Yeah, but I said I would put you on the spot, and I think Ambassador Batilda has put you on the spot, and I just emphasize that today, or this week for us, is about charcoal and alternatives. But globally, it's about plastics. And it's exactly 12 years since I was sitting on a desk that we initiated the war against plastic bags. And I said at one time that it's now another of our national flags, because it's all over. Really, we have tried, but it seems there's some difficulty somewhere. If it is because of employment, I think the alternatives to plastic bags will generate a lot of employment, particularly to our youth and to women and entrepreneurs. So where is who is this great, the most powerful person who is preventing the entire country says no, but says, let's continue with this plastic. I'm not saying it's the president, not at all. I'm saying there must be someone calling the shots, saying that, we invested in this. That's what they used to say. We invested in this machine, but they have already returned their investment many times over. I think it's time we made a decision. I was listening attentively to Her Excellency's speech when the plastics were mentioned, and I was hoping that she would say, from today in Tanzania, the ban is being proclaimed. But I'm sure she left it for you to say. Please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I must thank all of you for staying this long. We're getting to 5 o'clock, and most of you have been here since 9 o'clock, so this shows commitment. Commitment to this symposium, but to the issue of environment. And I think we should all form our own green party, yeah? So this is very good, and it encourages us who are working in this area, because it's a very tough area to try to gather people to work together and commit. So this gives us tremendous encouragement, so thank you very much. Now, before I go to plastics, I also want to say some few things. One is today's discussions since morning have revealed to me and have confirmed to me that we have consensus in a number of areas. One is we have a problem, right? Our climate is being damaged, so that's number one. We can see it, we can feel it in our wallets, and we can now worry that we can feel it in our economy. So we have a problem. There's a consensus. Nobody here argued, and I think at one point in the past there was an argument about the science of climate change and environmental degradation, but the consensus is there that we have a problem. Number two is that we have a consensus that the fate of humanity hinges on our ability to solve this problem, or inability to solve this problem. There is a consensus on that. Much as most people suffer from short-termism, in the sense that in the long run we will all be dead, but if we are concerned about the humanity in its totality, then we know that our future, our fate, is tied to our ability or inability to solve this problem. Consensus number 3 is that our action is what's happening. Our actions are responsible for what's happening. It's not an accident. We have actively committed certain things that resulted in the situation that we're in today. So climate change, environmental degradation is caused by our action. Because in the past there was a debate that, oh, we are not responsible, that's every 100 years this happens and so forth. But now there's a consensus that we are responsible. Another consensus, which makes me hopeful and all of us, is that we can do something about it. We can do something to mitigate the impact of what's happening and reverse the cause. And our belief in organizing this symposium was that we can talk about precisely that. What can we do as people, as government, to change the cause of the path that we are in, which is destructive, in which we'll be the first generation to hand over the planet to our children and grandchildren in a manner that life may be difficult for them than it was for us. So now that we agree that we can do something about it, we have been discussing in these summits and COP1 up to 24th now, and all these international conferences. The discussion has been what to do and who is responsible in doing what. So obviously today Symposium cannot conclusively and comprehensively answer this question, but at least we have started coalescing and aggregating ideas on what to do. So, somebody in the morning mentioned that very interesting insight, that the planet can adapt, but we can't, and we must. Nature can adapt. That if you ruin something and then somehow you go back, but we can't, and we need to do something about it. So I'm very hopeful that we have started something. We have started this dialogue, and it's not the last time. We will continue. We are very hopeful that in this era where internationalism and multilateralism is under threat, which threaten the ability of all of us working together to solve this problem, at least the composition of this room in terms of nationalities and occupation gives us hope that we can work together, because this is humanity's challenge. And I'm very happy that ambassadors who are normally very busy, are here. See, Finnish ambassador, United Kingdom, Danish, Sweden, and all other important people who have all important tasks that are here. So this idea that we have to and we can work together as demonstrated by our being here together, people from different nations, that also could probably be one area that will cure the erosion of the tradition of multilateralism. You mentioned internationalism is under threat, but maybe climate diplomacy is where, we can come together and solve even other problems. In the past, nations met to prevent wars, and then later they cooperated so they could trade. And I think we see that the next area of cooperation is to save our planet. And we may not like each other, but we will be compelled to do that because our survival depends on it. And it's not accident that Sweden has climate ambassador. So they've seen a little bit farther that diplomacy and climate cannot be decoupled in the future. And this is important. Now, the plastic bags. And I appreciate when I went to this office that you occupied, I saw efforts that you undertook to tackle this question. And initially, the idea was to make people to reuse plastic bags, because there are two issues here. There's issues of waste management, which it doesn't matter what type of waste. It could be plastics, it could be other things. So the culture of waste management and the challenge that we have exists whether or not we have plastic. And there's an issue of content of our waste. And that's where the plastic bags and plastic products come in. Because if you talk to plastic manufacturers, they'll say, the problem is not us and our products. The problem is the culture of people to just waste things and throw away things. So you may ban plastic bags, but you may still have a waste management issue. But we know that there's a global consensus here that plastic products affects our oceans and so forth. So the movement is to reduce the consumption and the use and eventually get rid of them. You are correct that there is heavy opposition from people who benefits the most from this product. And once upon a time, there was no plastic bags and life existed. And we believe that sometime in the future, there won't be plastic bags and life will continue. Now, as it stands now, plastic bags are so ingrained in our daily lives. You go to every corner, every village, every shop, there is a plastic bag, and some are given for free. So if you want to be successful in getting rid of them, because it's very easy to pronounce a date for banning plastic bags. But if you want to be successful, you start with information. And one of the things that I realized is that there was a massive information gap about the number of plastic bags that are being used in this country, where do they come from, where are they produced, how much are being sold. So I asked my people to bring me the numbers so that I can make the case for, and as you know, this decision has to be collectively made by the entire government because banning plastic bags affects everybody, in the agriculture, in the healthcare, and we have to be very clever about exceptions, medicines and packages and these kind of things. So the numbers that I got from my people and from really where we collect numbers were confusing. One, the official, if you go to the Ministry of Industry and Trade, the official number of factories doing plastic bags and plastic products are 46 factories. And if you ask how much plastic bags were produced last year, 2016. 2016 was 73 tons. 73 tons from 46 factories. And if you ask now, how much did we import for plastic bags? It's over 3,000 tons, right? So, and the argument about plastic bags has been jobs. We're going to lose jobs, close factories. So we asked how many people work in plastic bags factories. The number came to 6,000 people. And obviously, more indirectly. So if you divide 6,000 people, divide by 46 factories, you get about 130 people. So that means each factory has 130 people. And if you divide 73 by 43, you'll find that each factory produced less than 2 tons per year. So that means 130 people produce 2 tons per year. So if you analyze these numbers, they don't make any sense. And if I go to the cabinet with a paper with those numbers, I'll be kicked out. So, so part of the challenge is data and number in trying to do this. So the delay in banning plastic bags is not because of lack of intentions. It's that we have decided to procure an independent entity to thoroughly look into the numbers so that we can make a solid and informed decision. But we will get there one day.
Thank you very much, Honorable Makamba. I think this we are running out of time, but we have we have time for three presentations or questions from the floor. But let's see how we proceed. Yeah, can we have an intervention? Right at the corner there.
Thank you, Your Excellency, honored speakers. My name is R.J. Gregory. I'm with the Mkanda Levu project. Dr. Burian briefly mentioned charcoal use, but as an investor in a sustainable energy project, I would like to know the panel's, the panel's thoughts on this government's willingness to enforce the existing laws and regulations governing the dirty charcoal trade, and also if the government has any willingness to provide incentives for the growth and development of alternatives, i.e. tax incentives.
Well, that's a very pertinent question, particularly for the theme of this week, national theme for the Environment Week. Minister Makamba.
So I'll quickly answer that question. One of the things that we are working very hard, direction of the Vice President, is to make sure that we deal with this question of charcoal. We have looked at the numbers. A huge percentage of trees, up to, depends on which study you look. Some say 60, others say 80% of big rounded trees in this country are cut not because of agriculture, not because of construction, but because of charcoal. So charcoal contributes massively to deforestation. So dealing with the question of charcoal will help us in dealing with deforestation by a huge percentage. Now, 70% of charcoal in this country is used in one city, Dar es Salaam, the city which the most electrified. So the argument that electrification leads to less use of charcoal is defeated by the evidence that we see in Dar es Salaam. So what's the alternative to charcoal? One, gas, piped gas, from Twara by TPDC to houses, and the Ministry of Energy is doing that. The pace, we believe, could be more. Another alternative is the LPG, contained gas. This is where we see a tremendous movement in terms of volumes that are being imported in this country, and the price going down, and also innovation in pricing. In Tanzania, actually, sometimes the trade balance with Kenya benefits from re-export of LPG from this country. So we are an LPG power in the region. Now, why is it not so widely used? Because of pricing structure. Our people buy cooking energy in small bundles because of the income. If they want to cook breakfast, they go buy 800 shillings worth of charcoal. Lunch, 800. Dinner, 800. So that's how they spend money. So now, as far as cooking energy, they are compelled to buy a bigger chunk. If you go to Oryx, you buy 80,000, 50,000, 30,000, the money that our people don't have. In the past, you will recall, we were much younger, when mobile companies came in, a lot of people couldn't afford to buy airtime. Why? Because the lowest denominator of airtime were at the amount where we couldn't afford. But then innovation came. Now you could buy airtime if you have 200 shillings. So the movement now towards cooking energy, which is because charcoal wins because of the pricing model and nothing else. Charcoal is not cheap. Charcoal is expensive than gas, but they've succeeded in selling in small bundles. You can get charcoal for 500. So we believe alternatives can win in the market. They cannot win through diktat from the government. And so what we're trying to do now in the Vice President Office and the Ministry of Natural Resources is to encourage entrepreneurism and innovation in cooking energy. So now we are working with 2 LPG companies to roll out meters in which you can be given a gas cylinder with 50,000 shillings gas, but you only pay the amount that you want. Through a meter, an M-Pesa, 500, you open, you cook for 500, the gas cuts. So we're doing a pilot now. We think maybe next year we can roll out in big masses. And another is alternative to charcoal through the young people there in Mnazi Moja, and I encourage you all to go there. They're making briquettes, and this gentleman who also asked the question is in that business. We see promise there, tremendous promise. If we could just not necessarily sort of fiscal, and I'm not in a position to make pronouncement on fiscal incentives here, but I think we can do other things, policy and regulatory interventions to make it possible for alternatives to charcoal to compete with charcoal.
Thank you, Honorable Makamba. Very interesting innovations that are coming up in your department. Any other? Two more interventions. Well,
yeah.
He has already the mic. Yeah.
Now, thank you, moderator.
Yeah, please continue.
Yes, my name is Faza Lisa from Forum CC, which is a network of civil society working on climate change in Tanzania. As you mentioned, you had the honor to moderate such a high-level panel, and I also want to echo that. I have also the honor to ask the question, contribute, and make a request to such high-level panel, including Madam Vice President here. So my contribution in question will focus on resource mobilization. We have talked a number of solutions to climate change challenges that are here. So first to Honorable Tizeba, your ministry is facing a lot of challenge in terms of the sector that you lead, agriculture. And I don't want to take you back to the budget discussion, but one of the challenge was resource mobilization in terms of financing different initiatives. So how is your ministry planning to take advantage of international climate financing initiatives, that funding bodies that are there, to access funding to complement to what you mobilize from the private sector and the government? We have seen a number of institutions in Tanzania, Ministry of Finance, TAMISEMI, applying or having intent to apply for accreditation under GCF. We have seen NEMC being accredited under Adaptation Fund. Agriculture, which we all know that is mostly affected. So you have the case, it could be easier to get accreditation and the funding. So what's the plan, concrete plan for your ministry to access such funding opportunity? And the other one goes to contribution and the request. I know Madam Vice President is here. We are trying to mobilize resources from different levels, including the international opportunity that I mentioned. But we have a challenge in terms of how do we track such financing. One, we don't have a comprehensive climate financial mechanism. And two, I would like also to recall what Mr. Makamba said last year during the budget speech, the call to have a specific environment or climate budget code. So because Madam Vice President is here, I would like maybe to ask her to support your intent and call to all ministry to have such a code so that we could track what is going and what is invested in climate change and see if it's actually enough to address the challenges that we have. Shukran.
Thank you. Who will start?
I'll start.
Okay, please.
Yeah. Actually, thank you for the concern. But if I was to talk of the budget scenario in Dodoma, I think that was just a misunderstanding of how agriculture is managed in this country. We have a governance system where agriculture is not centered in one ministry. It is scattered in at least 5 ministries. So if you aggregate how much has been allocated in these 5 different ministries, you'll find that it's not that small. Actually, this morning I was talking to journalists. I told them, look, probably it's the most funded ministry in the government. Because as we stand today, and this will be revealed during the launch on Monday, the sector, through government and development partners' interventions, we are looking at close to 3 trillion shillings in the sector. So that's not small money. It is a tremendous amount of money. We are not worried. The issue is how do we manage this money? And the issue of how climate change is managed and the funds allocated for that, we have in the ministry, as I said earlier, we have a section which is dealing with climate smart agriculture. So there is a funding for that. But we are also talking to our development partners and other stakeholders to see what kind of interventions they can make into making our farmers aware and resilient to climate change issues. So there are two or three other ways to see that at least there is some funding in that particular direction. Actually this morning is one of the development partners was telling me that at least they're thinking of coming up with a program into different areas, dry areas in the country, to see what they can do in terms of creating awareness and making farmers prepared for severe climate situations.
Honorable Makamba.
Just quickly to complement a response by the Minister is that the government now is changing the resource mobilization modalities where there's much greater centralization of resource mobilization for different sectors, where it is to be in the now it's in the Ministry of Finance. So, so even if he had an opportunity now to be accredited, he probably will have shifted to the Ministry of Finance anyway. That's one. Two, our office issues letters for accreditation. So I received the FAO gentlemen and IFAD people seeking us to approve programs to access money at GCF. And some of this money are for regional consumption, projects around the region. So there need to be a greater coordination, even in the diplomatic community here, our partners, in programs and resource expenditure and so forth. So there seems to be at times competition on, and which leads to duplication on efforts. And we, frankly, and I'm sorry to say this, my boss is here, but there's a frustration on our part where we try to mobilize resources for environmental protection, and then you meet an ambassador and say, we spend a lot of money in environment, but we don't see it. And so there ought to be also an appreciation on our partners on how we are structured so that we can account for the resources that are spent in the country and these funds and also assistance from our partners. Now, I don't remember even my question. The budget code, we are working on it. And if the PS here had a microphone, probably, because I tasked him to do it. But we're going to have every local government have a budget number, budget code for environmental protection. The conversation with the Treasury has reached a good stage. It's just a matter of execution. We delayed a little bit the financial year, but I think next financial year we will do that.
Thank you very much. The last intervention
yes.
From, I'll be gender sensitive. Stephen, you're not gender sensitive. No, nobody? You're quiet.
Okay.
Where is Karondosi?
It seems there is no one women to contribute. Let me take part. Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Chair, for giving me this opportunity to contribute in this high-level symposium. I have a couple of questions.
Your name, please?
My name is Dr. Frank Theodori from Mzumbe University. My first question goes to Honorable Charles Tizeba. I know one of your key responsibilities is to ensure the country food security. And in your talk, you mentioned that we should also think of how we capitalize on the positive impact of climate change. And nowadays, there is a growing notion among especially the rural farmers of taking climate change for granted. Even of recent years, even the technocrats have fallen in such trap of taking climate change for granted, that everything happening, if there is a poor agricultural production, they will definitely blame of climate change. But for me, I just view it in another dimension, that maybe our people are lazy, because as our president have been every day repeating, emphasizing that he will not take the issue of food insecure for granted, because it seems like maybe in the previous seasons it rained a lot, but people did not capitalize on that rains to grow sufficient agriculture. So my question is that, how do you deal with that to make sure that people do not take for granted the climate change, and the technocrats do not fall in such trap, so that people may produce, may capitalize on the available rains and produce enough for the country? The second question go to my brother, Honorable Makamba, on the issue of adaptation. And as we have seen that adaptation, this seems to be an rhetoric concept, a traveling idea from the global north to the global south, whereas the local community doesn't know about adaptation, sometimes even though they have lived with climate change for ages, but they have been adapting in different ways. How do we really communicate these different adaptation strategies to the local communities so that we customize to the local situation and they can eventually adapt successfully to climate change? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, our esteemed panelists.
I think this last question was asked in the morning and was responded
it was responded to.
So I'll pass.
No, he didn't.
I think this question on traditional modes of adaptation was asked in the morning, and I think it was responded to. So we'll save time. Maybe we can talk on the side.
Yeah. Food security and taking cover, or rather blaming climate for inefficiencies. I don't think this is what we are doing. It's very rare for the government, for that matter, to blame weather, that it has caused adverse yields or production in any case. What we are doing, we're encouraging people to use better farming practices, adapting to technologies which will guarantee them yields, and not hide behind flies or something as a reason why we don't have enough food. But by the way, for the past 4 or 5 years in Tanzania, we have yields more than what we need, so there is no question of food insecurity in the country. And that's more reason His Excellency the President is always telling people that there won't be any free handouts anymore. One has to work, and the weather and technology, everything is there for those who want to do it, to produce enough for themselves and for the markets. So maybe it used to be like that, but trust me, we don't hide behind such reasons anymore.
Well, we have come to the end of our panel discussion this afternoon, and it has been, I said, an honor for me to moderate such a high-powered panel of dignitaries. Well, what more can I say? It is, I should thank you, Minister, and after you say, then I think he'll take over. So may I say, you know, if you're given a mic, just present what you want to say. This politician...
no, I wanted them to say one word each.
You know what? I've heard you.
To conclude.
I've heard you, but I said that since I have the mic,
So
I might as well. No. I might as well finish what I want to say. But when the minister suggests, it's an order. Please, Lars, have the last word. I'll finish.
Well, I'll just tell you what's trending in Sweden nowadays. And what's trending is the prospects that each household will supply its own energy. And by solar panels, and it will supply its cars from that, it will supply its heating, and it will supply, the refrigerator, and that's the way people who are working in this business. This is how we are going to build our houses, and that's off-grid. That's for each household, and selling also to the larger companies. And I can't see, maybe that's something relevant question here as well. I'm just showing what's trending in my country. Thank you.
Yes, Honorable Batilda.
Thank you. Actually, just to add to the last remark from Minister Tizeba, taking advantage of climate change, I know in Mbeya now you're growing cocoa. ICRAF is supporting the villages because of the change of the weather and climate. Just to conclude, I would say we need to strengthen the National Environmental Management Council. As we are driving to the industrialization and having an industrialized society, we need to equip our inspectors to be able to really do their work, but also to give education so that these environmental impact assessments are not seen as an obstacle, but as a relevant process to support for future advantage of the country. And lastly, since the Parliament has endorsed the Paris Accord, the national determined contribution, the NDCs, now really we need to communicate and to work on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maybe let me put it this way. That, as I said, climate is changing, and our farming practice must also change.
Thank you. We must adapt.
Yes.
Honorable Makamba.
Yes, just what we're doing as government, as the Vice President's office, under the leadership of our Vice President, we are building a stool with 4 legs so that we can manage to do what we need to do. The first leg is institutions. We can talk about all the things, but we need to build institutions. NEMC has to be strong. Environment sections in ministries and local governments have to be built. We have to have committees, environmental committees from street level as the law requires. Each council has to have district environmental management officer. So these institutions, solid institutions to enable us to make EMA work. Another stool is legal, regulatory policy, guidelines that needs to be there. EMA is very progressive legislation. It needs regulations around it. The Minister responsible for environment has a lot of powers in the law, but we need to be organized as government so that those powers are exercised and respected as the law envisioned. So we're building that second stool. The third stool is the partnership, international partnership, and things such as this visit by the ambassador there, us being able to travel, working in these international treaties that we are part of, because the challenge that we face is of international nature. So that stool of international partnership, that leg, we are also building it. And the last leg is the software, the change of attitudes and mentality, because environmental protection to a large extent entails changing people's attitudes and the things they value. And that's much harder than building institutions and finding resources and creating partnerships. And that's what we're doing. And we are hopeful under her leadership we'll get there.
Well, thanks a lot. It's been quite a day, I think, and quite a panel. It can't be higher than this on these matters. So thank you again for inviting me to be the moderator of this panel. You have really sort of hauled me from the village straight to Dar es Salaam. And I'm surprised that electricity, is available 24 hours. I'm used to five minutes of electricity per day. So, but still, life in the village is the best, I can assure you. So, retirement isn't all that bad. Anyhow, thank you very much for your kind attention, and thank you for particularly Honorable Vice President. It's been an honor, and for you to spare some time even to sit here and listen to your team, but to the entire, to all the impressions from the floor, I think it's a great honor to us. So we are most pleased and most thankful. So let's clap for our high-level
Thank you very much.
Panelists.
Thank you very much.
Over to you.
Thank you very much, our moderator.
Thank
Thank you, ministers and ambassadors. And if you can please step down, except for the Honorable Minister Makamba, he has to give the vote of thanks.
Okay, this was not part of the plan, but there's always something to say. And obviously I'll repeat what I've already said, because I took an opportunity there to thank. But again, I want to thank you, Your Excellency, the Vice President, for opening this symposium and for being with us for a significant amount of time. I want to thank our partners, the Nordic embassies, for doing this with us. I want to thank all the ambassadors for spending time with us here. I want to thank everybody who came, especially the panelists and moderators who have contributed their time to make this successful. I want to thank all attendees and all our partners who have contributed to the success of the not only this event, but the entire World Environment Week, which today we're on the second day, and tomorrow and day after tomorrow we have events. And I want to invite all of you to attend the rest of the events as the program indicates. We are very heartened by the commitment that your presence and continued stay for the whole day demonstrated. We are very hopeful that we can continue to count on your partnership, on your commitment to deal with the issues that we faced as a humanity. I do not want to rehash what has been discussed the entire day. We're all here. We have listened. We believe that the day has been successful. Some of us have been inspired, re-energized, learned. Some of us have made connections with one another. We've made new friends and acquaintances. And each one of us has left with something today. And for that, I thank you all. And karibuni sana. Next year we'll do something bigger and bolder, right? And very happy, and I know I speak on behalf of the Vice President as well. When I was seeing her off and welcoming her back in, she was very impressed by your presence and by the organization. And you have given me a little bit of credit because she's my boss, so it's good. So I thank you for that. So thank you again. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
One last announcement. Oh yes, and I thank myself also. By the way, please clap